Okay, so welcome everybody to our real estate investor workshop. Today we'll be discussing how to build a power team. By way of introduction, if you haven't seen me before, my name is Michael Matthew, and I've been a professional accountant for more than 30 years. My international practice is increasingly focused on real estate and real estate investors. I'm also the CFO for a local home builder. I own a condo locally in the Toronto area, and right now I'm looking for small apartments in the US, specifically in Texas. In terms of services, I offer entity structuring on both sides of the border, so setting up your corporations, also operational and tax consulting and planning, and of course, filing tax returns on both sides of the border. Tonight, we're going to be covering the topic of setting up a power team, and we're going to cover a number of different individuals or organizations that you're going to want to have on your team to have a successful career in real estate investment. Starting with a coach, we'll talk about real estate broker, a property inspector, lawyers. Of course, the most important thing is accountants, as we all know, but I may be a little biased. Lenders, mortgage agent, appraiser, insurance agent, contractor, designer, architect, property manager, and paralegal. Now, to keep the lawyers happy, a brief disclaimer: none of the information provided in this presentation is to be taken as tax, accounting, or legal advice, and it shall not be relied upon as such. None of the materials are to be construed as a solicitation, recommendation, or offer to buy or sell any security, product, property, or instrument. Also, while I do my best to ensure that this presentation is as up to date as possible, it's subject to being made obsolete by new legislation coming out or a new tax court case being decided as soon as tomorrow, and that could change the course of what you should be doing entirely. So before you undertake any sort of real estate purchase, please check with your advisors. There will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation. In the meantime, please put your questions in the chat so you don't forget them. For those of you that have more detailed questions, feel free to book a 30-minute session. There's a link here, and maybe George, you can put that in the chat as well, where you can book a session with me. Appointments are available on the hour and the half hour tomorrow from 2 to 4 in the afternoon, and also on Monday from 10 to noon. If none of those times are suitable, you can email me at the address shown to arrange a mutually convenient time. So I'm just going to turn my, so we're starting with the power team members. And what is a power team? Well, a power team is going to consist of specialized individuals you need to have a successful real estate investment experience, such as those that we previously listed. The goal is to leverage others' skills to free your time to do what you do best, which could be locating areas to invest in or raising funds for investment. Local specialists will have insider knowledge and business relationships acquired through years of working in their market, which is very difficult for the investor to possess, especially when investing long distance. The general approach to getting started with this sort of thing is to join online or in-person investor clubs such as Meetup. So obviously, if if you're here, you've done that. But more to the point, you should join them also in areas where you're looking to invest in. That also applies to Facebook groups and other types of investor clubs. You're going to want to ask for referrals to the team member you're looking for, and ask fellow investors about their working relationship with those team members, because most investors are very willing to share their experiences. It's always a good idea to find power team members who are investors themselves, as they will bring an investor mindset to their work and will also be familiar with the typical investor concerns. For example, a realtor who's also an investor won't constantly bring you properties that don't cash flow when you've told them that's a deal breaker for your investment model. So the first specific team member we're going to look at is a coach or mentor. Smartest thing you can do is to start by getting a real estate coach or mentor. They'll give you the benefit of their experience, so you don't have to spend all the years and all the money they've spent to gain that experience. They can also act as a consultant for you throughout your real estate career. You're able to get their input on all your deals, for example, and being told not to invest in something is quite possibly even more important than being told to invest in something. They'll be able to spot the hidden traps that perhaps as a beginning investor you didn't see. You can often get checklists from them. So I know from my coaches, I got checklists of how to interview the power team members to get one that's a good fit for you. So how to interview a realtor, how to interview a property manager, etc. Myself, I have 3 real estate coaches plus other business coaches. One of the real estate coaches concentrates on multifamily. Another brings a diverse mixture of investment model experts and sort of related development people, such as a public speaking coach, to give you exposure to new markets and improving your skills to make whatever work you're doing more effective. The third coach brings very creative solutions that can dramatically improve how much income an investment property generates. So a real estate broker, most people know, of course, that they're there to help you find a property. They can do the initial screening for you, and after a little bit of training, will only bring you properties that have a good chance of working for you. And obviously, that's what you want. You don't want someone who just sends you anything, because after the first couple, you'll realize it's just a waste of your time to even look at those. You're going to want to establish a relationship with a broker. Now that will take time, and right now, as we're finding, it can be difficult because there's so few deals out there that brokers are busy chasing deals. But having patience to develop that relationship will pay off, because many investors get their access to deals by establishing that relationship, so they are able to acquire deals that are not publicly accessible on the multiple listing service, or MLS. That said, some people have a different approach, which is they only want to look at the old or expired listings on the MLS to see if they can bring additional income streams to the property, and by so doing, make a bad deal a good deal. Next is property inspector. A good property inspector will cost you hundreds and save you thousands. And a good example of that was we put an offer in on some homes in Ohio. It was accepted. And we sent a property inspector to have a look at what we thought was the place in the worst shape. And came back with a report of, yes, there are significant deficiencies, but two things really scared us off. One was that the property was graded such that it was sloping towards the home. And for those of you that aren't sure what that means, that meant when there was rain or other precipitation, it would drain in towards the home. You want it to slope away from the home so that it's far less likely to have damage to your foundation and create a leak situation. Those can be very hard to spot because obviously the property inspector is not going around digging up the house to check the foundation, below grade. But also the other thing that it scared us off was the property manager was lying to the tenants and trying to tell them that was their responsibility to fix things that were not their responsibility at all. It was the existing landlord. So by spending, I think it was $359, we saved God knows how many tens of thousands of getting stuck with bad properties that were poorly maintained. And we also got referral to a property manager in that area because that inspector himself was a real estate investor. So he knew that we would need a property manager that could actually do the job and was more than happy to pass along that referral. In terms of what the property inspector is looking for, it's things that are significantly deficient, unsafe, near the end of their service life, or not functioning properly. They focus on health, safety, or major mechanical issues. Now, the reports that they prepare will give you two ways to proceed. You can cancel the deal because they found sufficient problems to do so, which is what we did. Or you can go back to the seller with the report and negotiate either the seller making those repairs, or more likely, the seller will drop the sales price by the amount of the required repairs. So it gives you the ability to perhaps drop $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 off the price. Depending on the value of the home, it could be more. Now, to give you some idea of what they look for, here are some of those things. So damage to the electrical system. Does the garage door work properly? This is a big one. If there's any sign of insect or pest infestation, they're going to make sure they highlight that in the report. Issues with the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. What's the condition of the roof? These are big ticket items that if you had to fix, you wouldn't be very happy. Plumbing problems. Any stairway or railings, their condition, structural and foundation issues as best they can. As I said, they're not going to excavate the property. And water damage is another big one. Now, of course, there are things that they're not going to look at as well. Anything cosmetic. So for instance, if they're looking at peeling wallpaper, it's not because they're concerned about the appearance, but rather it could be an indication of a moisture problem and potentially mold. Now, I don't know if you know the name Brittany Murphy. She was a fairly young actress in early 30s who died suddenly. And there was rumors about substance abuse, et cetera, but it turned out that was not the case at all. When her boyfriend died a few weeks later, they got suspicious and did some proper autopsy work and found They both died from mold inhalation. So it's a serious issue. Now, they're not going to spend any time look at the home decor or the finishes. The only buildings they're going to look at beyond the house itself is a garage or carport, but not look at the inside of a chimney or security systems, screens, and shutters. Now, a proper inspection takes time. We hired a property inspector to look at a townhouse. So already there's less for him to do because certain things are responsibility really of the condominium corporation itself, as this was a condo townhouse. And he said it would take 3 hours. I said, it's a 3-story townhouse. How can that take 3 hours? It took about 3 hours and 10 minutes. A good property inspector is very, very thorough. He tested literally every single electrical outlet in the house and pointed out there was one that was cross-wired, which was an electrical hazard, potential fire hazard. So that's the level of detail a good inspector will go to. Next, everyone's favorite, lawyers. We have a good real estate lawyer, so we're happy, but you're going to need one for sure. They're there to protect your interest. Lawyers can set up corporations, draft shareholder and joint venture agreements, which are an absolute necessity if you're going to buy real estate with someone else who is not your spouse. I urge all my clients, if they're going into business with someone they're not related to directly in their immediate family, I mean, get those agreements drawn up. They'll, of course, produce or review the agreements of purchase and sale, review mortgage contracts, and those of you who have a mortgage know how much fun that must be, given the things are like 80 pages in small type. And they can also draft private loan agreements if that's how you're getting your financing. So next, everyone's favorite, at least mine, the accountant. So obviously accountants are designed, their work is designed to run numbers all day so they can help you evaluating any deals you're considering. Also can help you set up corporations, prepare and file your tax returns, provide operational and tax advice, and are able to refer you to other opportunities and resources based on the knowledge that and experience they pick up by dealing with other clients who also invest in real estate. So I have, of course, do that myself. I pass along such referrals to clients as they require them. Now, I think most people know what lenders do. Obviously, they're providing funding, which is crucial because even if you're Jeff Bezos, I think he's supposedly the #1 richest man in the world. If you're investing only with your own money, sooner or later you run out of money. So the answer to that is you need to learn how to work with other people's money. Now, banks typically provide the cheapest money in terms of interest, but they're also the most demanding when it comes to paperwork and reporting. On the other hand, private lenders or investors are more flexible. They're usually more expensive. But if your, say, business model is flipping homes and you're only going to hold it for 3 to 6 months, it's okay to pay 12% interest, let's say, because which works out to 6% because it's only for 6 months. But you could conceivably talk to a private lender, sign a deal, and get the money all within a week. Whereas with a bank, you're lucky to get in a couple of months. So the next one is a mortgage agent. I urge all my clients to never work with a bank directly, but always to work through a mortgage agent. As a starting point, they have access to the big banks, and I don't care which bank you're dealing with. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and they'll listen to you and give you the absolute best product they have. But that's the problem. It's the best product they have. What they won't do is tell you, well, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but the reality is, George, if you went down the street, you get a better deal at some other bank, right? They'll never do that. They could get fired for doing that. Mortgage agents also have access to what are called monoline lenders. So these are lenders that only provide mortgages. One of the big ones is First National. I had my mortgage with them at one point. So in other words, they don't do deposits, they don't do car loans, they don't do business loans. All they do is mortgages. Mortgage agents also are able to deal with private lenders like we just talked about. And one of the major advantages is they will only have to pull your credit report once, because they'll share the same report with all the potential lenders. Whereas if you decide, well, I want to do my own comparison shopping, I'm going to go to 3 banks and I'm going to contact First National and some other mono lender, you're going to have to pull your credit report 5 times. And believe it or not, that will actually damage your credit. So far better to work with a mortgage agent who will be able to get you flexible financing that suits your situation best. And they're also similar to loan brokers, but that's more in the US. A good mortgage agent can be very creative in helping you get a product that truly suits your needs. As an example, I was actually out of the country trying to deal with my mortgage, and there was a last minute hiccup such that I needed bridge financing. And I think most of you know that bridge financing is where you get a loan for a very short period of time to just carry you over, in other words, cross the bridge to when you get the longer term financing solution. So what happened in this case, because I was working with a mortgage agent, she loaned me her own personal funds for, I think it was like a week or less. And that gave us enough time to get the bank financing in place. However, without that bridge financing, the deal would have collapsed. So that was obviously crucial for both of us. And of course, there's no chance that if you're dealing with a bank directly that they would have offered that. So appraisers are paid by the buyer, but they work for the lender. And what they're doing is, based on their experience, they're determining the value of the property. And that in turn allows the lender to determine how much they wish to lend using the loan to value, or LTV relationship. It's a good idea to anchor the appraiser's valuation. We touched on this previously. But by providing your own comps, especially if you will be doing significant repairs, is a very useful thing to do, because you will often get a higher valuation by pleading your case in advance. In other words, you're not complaining after the fact. You're giving them what you think is the value based on the work you're going to be doing in this case and the competitive prices from that area. Now, if there's a large discrepancy with the appraiser's valuation coming in well below what you think it should be, you can always fire them and hire a more reasonable appraiser, one that's willing to look at your comps, etc. Now, of course, the appraiser still has to be approved by the lender, but that's usually not an issue because they always work with multiple appraisers, given the workload is such that they may need a bunch of homes appraised all at the same time, and therefore they can't rely on a single person or a single firm. You're going to want, of course, an insurance agent, and you want one especially who deals with real estate investors all the time. They'll be able to point out key areas of coverage you're going to need, such as vacant unit coverage. What a lot of people don't know, because they don't read the policy that closely, and of course their agent wouldn't point it out, is that if their rental unit happens to be empty more than 30 days between tenants, in my case that's happened at least twice, maybe 3 times, that they have no coverage whatsoever on day 31. If there's a fire, a flood, or some other vandalism or any sort of damage, because the unit is vacant, the insurance company will void the policy after 30 days. That's standard. So by working with an insurance agent who specializes in that, they'll point out that, and also they'll be able to get you coverage for up to 90, or I've seen as much as 120 days. And that should be enough. That's reasonable, I think, to get a new tenant in there, even if you're doing some rentals. Also, you're going to want coverage for appliances and fixtures. Let's say you're investing in a condo apartment like I have. You may think, well, why do I need insurance? The condominium itself has insurance, true. I require the tenant to have their own insurance because it's right in the lease, okay. But what they don't realize is that doesn't cover the appliances and fixtures. So any blinds or curtains, the flooring, the appliances, of course, in the event of damage from whatever source. And while the building itself has insurance, it only kicks in when there's more than $50,000 worth of damage. So an insurance agent who's used to working with real estate investors will make sure that part of your policy covers damage up to that $50,000 amount. Now, that is what it is in my case. It seems to be fairly common, but of course, you're going to want to check your policy carefully to see what coverage you have, and also with your condominium to see where their coverage kicks in. And like so many other things these days, there's internet-based brokerages that offer you a low-cost alternative for insurance. Now, in terms of needing a designer or architect, that's only going to apply if you're building new housing or undertaking significant renovations. An experienced designer or architect can give you various options as to how best to use the space, which you may not be aware of. That's especially helpful if you want to include, say, a micro suite in your plans, like we looked at in January. They're able to design very functional spaces without requiring a lot of space to do so. So for example, I've seen designs for 300 square feet and less micro suites that are completely self-contained. Now, obviously, you're going to need a contractor at various points, certainly to do any initial repairs or renovations. And it may be a good idea for your contractor to walk through the property before you make an offer, as they will likely be able to spot issues you do not and allow you to adjust your offer accordingly. Even if you're able to do these things yourself, you should budget for a contractor since if you doing the work is the only way the deal will work, it likely means that the deal is a bad one. And of course, they'll also be needed to keep your property in a state of good repair throughout the tenancy. Deferred maintenance, so not fixing things on a timely basis, leads to a downgrade in the quality of your property, and then fairly soon after in the quality of your tenants. So it starts a downward slide, and obviously it works in reverse. So I had to kick out a tenant because there was a bug infestation, and it was really, really hard to get rid of, and they ultimately were not doing what they should. So we had to kick them out. And when they moved out, I hired contractors to paint the entire apartment from the floorboards all the way up to and including the ceiling, put in new appliances, ripped out the carpeted areas, partly because they were worn and partly because of the bug issue, and put in new flooring, put in a new door. And after all, clean the place, of course, top to bottom. After all those changes, I was able to increase the rent by 25%. So by doing this maintenance, you're able to attract a better tenant, and that tenant was able to pay me throughout the recent pandemic without any issues. So that was obviously very, very crucial to me. Property manager, obviously they look after the property. They'll find new tenants. They'll collect the rent often. They'll do minor repairs, and they'll supervise outside repairmen. They're also a good source of information before you buy real estate, especially if you're buying multi-unit properties, because they'll give their opinion on the quality of the neighborhood and the building. At this point, they have nothing to lose or gain, right? Because you're just calling them up for an opinion, say, look, I'm thinking of buying the property at such and such an address. What do you know about it? And they'll be completely honest, because if you don't work with them, they don't lose any money. If you do work with them, they make money. So if anything, they're going to be motivated to be absolutely candid with you. And finally, we come to a paralegal. So landlord-tenant disputes are typically handled by paralegals, as there frankly isn't enough money in these cases for lawyers to take them on. They'll represent you at the landlord and tenant board, which is obviously very procedurally driven. And if you don't fill out the forms exactly correctly, especially if you're working or you're trying to get rid of a what's they call a professional tenant who know all the rules, if you don't do your paperwork exactly correctly, the board will just kick the case, and you'll have to go through the process all over again after having corrected your paperwork. So they can save you a lot of grief by telling you how to do things correctly from the start. They can also help draft leases and various tenant forms regarding late rent, eviction notices, etc. Now, what they can't do is they can't help you to close on a property, at least not in Ontario. And that's just because the lawyers have insisted that they're the only ones who can do that. So, but that said, most lawyers are pretty reasonable with their fees when it comes to closing costs. Now, how to find power team members? It's a referral network. Brokers often know property managers and lenders, accountants and lawyers know each other, et cetera, et cetera. And really, you need one key person to start with. So that's often going to be a realtor, because that's the first contact, especially into a new area of investment for yourself. And you can go from there, because they'll refer you maybe to a lender, right? Or a property manager. And the property manager, well, they often know contractors because they are not capable of doing everything themselves, or insurance agents. And of course, lenders automatically know appraisers because they work for them. So by getting one key person, you're able to get all these people, because I think we spoke about 13 different roles here. And it can be quite intimidating if you think, oh, gee, I've got to come up with 13 people in an area that I know no one. How does that work? Well, it starts by you finding that one key person and having them refer, because they're not going to refer you to someone that they can't work with well themselves. And it's much easier for everybody if they work with people they know and people they like to work with. So by getting that first referral, you're often able to get everybody you need. And as mentioned before, a good way to do that is just to go into a meetup group or a Facebook group for the area that you're looking to invest in, and say, I'm looking to invest in this area, or I'm about to invest and I need a blank. Who do you like for that role in this area? And the same name comes up, 2, 3, 4 times, probably worth checking out. So in terms of key takeaways, it's just one thing, really. Building the right team will help you accelerate your results in real estate investing. I suppose the converse of that is, by not building the right team, you're going to hold yourself back. You're going to make it much more difficult than it needs to be. And it's going to cause a lot of frustration, I would think. So our next event will be the last Thursday in April, April 28th, provided I'm not buried too much under tax returns at the time. Again, we're going to start at 7 o'clock. And the topic will be announced later. I'm more than happy to hear some suggestions for topics you'd like me to cover. And I think now we're at the question part of the evening. So please feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat any questions that you have.
Michael, this is Maria.
Yeah. Hi, Maria.
Hi. Thank you for putting together this series of seminars or webinars, because I've attended a few of them. I haven't been able to attend all of them, but very informative. And I think you hit it on, like, in a sense of if you're looking for or looking to invest in a particular area, it's good to kind of ask around, whether it's friends or family or on Meetup, or one of the professionals, real estate broker, accountant, lawyer. They all are connected, and they have a set of referral sources, and they definitely can help guide you in the right direction, and give you a couple of resources so you can do your own interviewing and making sure that you connect. I think it's important that whoever you're dealing with understands your goals, and that your goals are aligned, so that you're working towards the same thing as you move on, whether it's your real estate broker, your mortgage agent, your lawyer, accountant, etc. So I think it's important that you align, you're comfortable, and have a good relationship, so that you can rely on each other for certain things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that I've heard said by several people, that you have to be very clear as to what you're looking for, because if your real estate agent, let's say, is bringing you multiple properties that there's no chance you would invest in, well, that's most likely your fault, because you didn't start out with by saying to them, okay, here's what I'm looking for. Because it's just a waste of everyone's time for them to bring you stuff that you're not interested in. Now,
Mhm.
that said, if it's a really great deal, you might be able to refer it to someone else and pick up a small fee, but that presupposes it's a good deal, just not for you, as opposed to it's not a good deal. And I find if you're not very specific, they'll just send you anything they have. And the
And
deals are not great deals.
yep, and sometimes as a beginner investor, you may not know exactly what you're looking for, so you
Sure.
are relying on the professional to kind of guide you or filter out and eliminate what he, start testing you by saying, would you be interested in something like this, and send you a couple. I'm not sure. Okay, send you kind of a different scenario, and then maybe re-evaluate to understand or better understand, because you may start off one way, and then as you progress, you may realize your goal is something else, and you just haven't, like you said, haven't communicated it, or you didn't really know what it was. Maybe you know what you don't want, but you don't know what you want.
Yeah, that's a fair point as well. And part of why I wanted to go over and did over, I guess it was January and February, a bunch of different possible ways to invest in real estate is because when I got started with this, which was just last year, really, in a serious way, I already
Mhm.
had my one property, but that was it, is every time they brought on someone to talk about what they were doing, that sounded great, right? They're not bringing on people that aren't good at what they're doing. So, oh, maybe I should do short-term rentals. Oh, maybe I should do student housing. Oh, maybe I should do this Burr method, which we talked about. Everything sounded good, but it's good to know a little bit about everything, but you need to narrow your focus because
Mhm.
it's really, really hard to do multiple things well at the same time. And part of what this team building is getting at is once you build a team in an area, look again in that area. Don't go to another city and start all over again because you're setting yourself back. Instead, see if there's another opportunity where you can use those same people because you'll move so much faster. They'll know you, you'll know them, and it will just work that much better for everybody because you don't have that awkward getting to know each other stages. Well, what information do you need? When do you need it? What do I have to do? So you can do what you have to do. All that's been ironed out. So that's important. And I would say in terms of not knowing, that's where a coach can really come in handy because you can say, look, you've talked about 1, 2, 4, 5, 6 different ways of doing it. I'm not sure where I'd like to start. Well, they'll start asking you questions about what resources do you have? What are your goals? How
Mhm.
much time do you have? And with those sorts of questions answered, they'd be able to point you in a direction or two, have you look into that and decide, okay, which one did you want to pursue? And then give it a go. I mean, there's, I think, a happy medium between the people who want to research for the rest of their life and do nothing. And the people who say, oh, I hear real estate is a good thing to do, and they just buy the first thing they see. I think there's a happy medium between the two. So you get some knowledge and get some direction, and then go out in that direction because I found it, almost paralyzing to have so many ways I could go before I decide to focus on multifamily in the US.
And I agree with you with respect to having a coach and getting guidance. You said you made a very I deal with a lot of people who just go out, like you said, and say, oh, real estate is a great place to invest, so I'm just gonna like haphazardly pick things and dive in, and then realize, oh, I don't really want to do the private financing, but I just realized I'm tapped out, or the bank isn't going to give me more, or whatever the scenario is, or I didn't really realize I wanted to do multi-dwelling, multifamily, or end up dealing with students, or So there's so many different scenarios, and I think it is important to have a coach. I started real estate investing uh, in my younger years, and so one of the coach I had was, well, you have lots of time, so maybe start off small and then you build up, and maybe buy one per year. Give yourself an opportunity to build up some equity, and then hopefully, anyways, I won't tell you the whole spiel, but that was one scenario that I was given, and I listened to a couple others, and then kind of made my own decision based on doing my research and listening to some coaches. And I think it's important because um, you also need to understand the pitfalls or the risks associated with going one way versus the other. And like you said, the habitual tenant, you know, um, dealing with something like that, and can you afford to be out of pocket for 6 months or a year before you go to a tribunal? And you're paying a paralegal, which is less expensive than a lawyer, yes, but you're still having to have costs coming out and potentially no rent coming in. um, I had clients a few years ago insisting to rent or invest in uh, an investment property as a rental, but it was a $1 million property. And my suggestion was, consult with a coach, maybe buy two smaller properties where you're spreading the risk over multiple properties. And they were adamant that they were going to have the one that's the property that they liked. And now they're dealing with um, a tenant issue because they can't afford to pay the high rent that they're expecting to pay for $1 million plus property, where they could have spread their risk over two properties. So as an example.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as you say, that's where a coach can help you. It also would, to me, highlights the need for proper screening up front,
Hmm.
because if you have a property manager who is truly professional in their job, they'll be able to screen out not all, but a lot of the problem tenants before they even get a foot in the door. And a great trick I heard about is you leave one form unsigned, right, as a property manager, or you can do this yourself, I suppose, and you show up unannounced at the prospective tenant's home, and you say, oh, I was just in the neighborhood, which of course
Yeah.
is likely to be a lie, but for good reasons. And why do you do this? Well, you want to see how they treat their current place.
Hmm.
Okay, it can be very revealing. If everything's neat and tidy and the lawn is properly mowed and everything is in good condition, that's one thing. Or if it's a disaster area, that's another thing. And you say, oh, I just need you to sign this one form. And yeah, you can look around fairly quickly while they're signing the form and know what you need to know. But I like that. That was a very good trick. And that was relayed to me by my coach, who has his property manager do this every time.
Oh, that's a good tip. I'll have to pass that on to anybody I know who's involved in the real estate investing. So that.
Yeah, well, it costs you almost nothing, but it can save you so much headache, especially if you're in a tenant friendly jurisdiction like Ontario, where, as you said, just to get a hearing takes 4 to 6 months before COVID. God knows what it is now because they're so
Behind.
behind.
Yep.
And the other thing is, and another reason why I'm not really looking to invest in the Toronto area, as you point out, the price of homes is so high,
Yep.
but the price of rent really hasn't kept up to the price of the home. So you have to really push to get a rent that's anywhere near able to cover your costs, let alone make you a profit.
Yep.
Right? It's just so hard. So basically, I tell people, if you don't already own a condo in Toronto, and own could be you bought it 3 years ago and they're just finishing it now, because that's usually how it goes.
Yep.
If you don't own it already, there's zero chance you're going to be able to make money renting it out, because the rents just are not high enough. Right? We're not New York prices or London, England prices where you can, to store a car, it's $2,000 a month, let alone a person. So
Hmm.
it's very difficult to make that math work. And as you say, by putting it all into $1 million property as opposed to two $500,000 properties, all their rental income eggs are in that same
Yeah,
basket.
yeah,
And
exactly.
that's another reason why I'm looking to multifamily, because if you're looking, something between 5 and 20 units. So let's just say 10 units,
Yeah.
because the math is easy. So if one of the 10 tenants stops paying because maybe they moved out or there's a dispute, well, I'm still making 90% of my income.
Yep.
Whereas if I have a single tenant property and that tenant moves out, I'm making 0% of my income. And as you pointed out, I'm gonna have costs to carry that, right? The
Mhm.
lender, whoever it is, they're not gonna say, oh, that's okay, Michael, that's okay, Maria. We understand your tenant isn't paying you, so you don't have to pay us, right? That's never happened.
Nope.
It took COVID just to get them to defer payments, but it's not like you didn't have to pay it. And certainly they're not going to stop asking you for money because your tenant isn't paying you, which is, as I said, why I'm thankful that by upgrading my unit, I got a better quality of tenant who, even throughout COVID, and even though she was laid off because she worked in retail, so for at least 3 months, she had no income,
Wow.
never missed a month in paying me.
Yeah, you're very lucky.
I am lucky. I
Yeah.
am absolutely lucky. So I did not have to do any mortgage deferral or anything because I kept getting paid the whole pandemic through, and
Yeah.
that's what we are through it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So anything else do you want to add, Maria?
No, I just think you're right. It's very important to have I think a good property manager, and the best thing to do is ask around and if you're getting multiple positive feedback by with one or two, then you kind of process of elimination and then do your interview.
Yeah,
Same with regards to appraisers. They do work for the lender, even though the borrower is paying for it. One of the things that's important to note is that it is also a report that's not provided to the borrower. The lender or the mortgage agent can provide details of it, but it's not something that's provided to the borrower as a general rule. And
that's right.
there
Yeah.
are there are ways to challenge the appraiser if they come out low. But I like the way you said it, that prep your appraisal if there's key features in the property that are either unique or you think that add value, address them or bring them up so that it's easy for them to note them quickly, and they can kind of make sure that they're captured. um, if you were to challenge an appraiser on their evaluation, some lenders, if you go back and either they do an adjustment or you go back and get another appraisal from a separate company, some lenders will take the average and they won't take the final if the final is significantly higher than the first. So just some key things that are important to understand. And they do take the lower of the appraised value or the purchase price. So
Yeah,
um,
that's true. So if you get a really good bargain, let's say, because it was a distressed seller said, look, I have to leave, my mother or father are out in Vancouver and they're sick. I gotta go look after them. So I just gotta sell this quickly as possible. And you're really buying under market and it appraises as that, you're right. You're not gonna get that higher appraisal value in terms of the lender. Yeah.
yeah, but you are getting a deal, so
Yeah,
it'll be reflected in your future valuation. So
sure.
not from a but then and then from a lender perspective, there's other options. So if you are looking at doing something where you're buying something and then making some improvements, you could discuss purchase plus improvements type option. So they'll add those additional improvements to the loan value at the end. So that's also a consideration if you're looking at something that needs some work before you rent it out.
Yeah, and that's why as you heard, I always recommend dealing with a mortgage agent such as yourself, because you know all the various programs, right? They're out there. And, so for instance, I just had a client that had a corporation that he was the only shareholder of. And we had to decide how much income was he going to pay out to himself,
Hmm.
because he had the choice of doing whatever he wanted based on because the income was all in the corporation. He had no income personally. And he was initially told that he needed to have a high income personally, because the bank was not going to look at the corporation's income whatsoever. And I always had a problem with that, because as an accountant, I look at, well, what's going to be taxed higher? At a corporation that does active work, his was some sort of consulting, in Ontario is taxed at 12.2%. The minimum tax rate personally is 20%. And for most people, obviously, it's higher. The next one up is just about 30, which I think is where he was going to be. And I said, well, if I'm a lender, I'd rather you pay 12% tax instead of 30, because now you have more money to pay me back. It's just the math of it, right? And I said, you need to get a second opinion. So he spoke to another mortgage agent whom I've worked with. We have several clients in common, and he gave him two options, which the other person didn't even mention. So you get someone who's experienced at working with real estate investors, and that's the key, because obviously if it's a mortgage for a property you're going to move into,
Hmm.
frankly, just about any mortgage agent is going to be able to help you. But many are not really used to working with real estate investors, and especially in creative situations. So he said, look, we can go with a stated income approach. You
Hmm.
pay yourself next to nothing personally, and you just produce bank statements and have a secondary way of verification to show that the deposits are income. He says, well, I've got invoices for all my clients. Great. You can get a very minimal allocation to personal expenses out of whatever the deposits are. So he gave an example. He had another consultant client. This is the mortgage agent, I mean,
Hmm.
and he had over $200,000 worth of deposits
Yep.
to his business. And they said, okay, well, we'll say 12,000 is personal expenses, so 1,000 a month. So he got credit for more than 185,000, I suppose 188 to be exact,
Yeah.
which qualified him for much higher valued property than he could have got otherwise. So that's where having an experienced mortgage agent comes into play. And the other thing I want to mention is there's a huge difference between an appraiser and a property inspector, because a
Yes.
property inspector, they're going to find something wrong with the property, right?
No matter what.
No matter what, that is their job. I mean, it's
Yes.
unstated, but once you've been around it for a while, you realize they will always find things, because that justifies their job, right?
Yeah.
But now, mind you, this is for a renewal mortgage, so it's a little bit more straightforward. But to renew my last mortgage, now this is also because of COVID, the tenant just took pictures, and she did actually a pretty good job. She took pictures of all the rooms and emailed them to me. I looked them, yeah, they're pretty clear. Emailed them to the mortgage agent, because of course I have a mortgage agent,
Yeah.
and she sent them on to the lender. In this case, it was a big bank, and they're perfectly happy. So the appraiser did not have to leave his desk or her desk to do the appraisal. They just looked at pictures.
Yep. They did actually do a drive-by. They do an exterior to confirm that the property
Yeah,
exists, but they didn't have to physically come in, take pictures, walk around. Exactly. Yeah. All through COVID, that was pretty much the protocol, unless you specified it was okay. But most of them didn't even want to come in, so
yeah.
it was a a great scenario for a lot of cases, and it was great to see that it can be modified in cases of risk or when there's people that are unhealthy or what have you.
Yeah,
Um,
I
yeah,
think it worked out
yeah,
because again, they were not doctored in any way. They're just
yeah,
clear, bright pictures. And the point is that they're going to spend maybe 10 minutes,
yep,
not 3 hours.
yep.
So
You touched on something about with regards to like even people who are self-employed or corporations. There are also lenders, actually some banks even, but I'm going to say they're not necessarily. There's either A and B kind of lenders that
mhm.
will look at the income in a corporation. So if you've got retained earnings,
Yeah,
um,
well, again,
yeah,
I didn't believe that because
yeah, I actually did one just recently,
I
and I
said
was quite
you got to
impressed.
get a second opinion. That doesn't
Yeah.
sound right at all because I'm sure I've had clients in that same situation in the past. So
Well, and I guess it depends on who we spoke to, right? And in a bank, it depends on who you're dealing with. Again, like you said, if they're experienced,
yeah, well,
if
that's just it.
yeah,
This mortgage person worked for a bank,
yeah.
so
So it depends on how experienced they are. If they're used to just dealing with somebody with a T4, or they kind of they don't know how to deal with the other scenarios. So
yeah, I that's another thing that I kind of bothers me because it's like if you have a T4, you're employed forever. Now, that may be the case if you work for the government,
yeah.
but you know, let's say you worked for Research in Motion, now called BlackBerry, right? You were raking it in huge, right? You
Hmm.
thought you were set for life. Not so
Not so
much,
much. Or
right?
Nortel.
I was thinking that one, or even Future Shop, right?
That's right. Forget about Future Shop.
You leave work on Friday, you show up on Monday, and your key doesn't work, and then you're sort of
Yeah.
blinking because you're still half asleep, and you say, "Oh, wait a minute! There's a sign on the door that says, 'We regret to inform you this
Yeah.
store is now closed.'" And they had zero warning. No, no one at Future Shop at the
Had-
employee level, the
Yeah.
lower
They,
level had any idea it was coming. So why banks think you because you have a T4 you're set for life and you could come in with 10 years of tax returns showing you made 100,000 minimum every year. They say, yeah, well, we don't know what you're going to do next year. But
yeah.
the problem is banks have, I don't know, 19th century thinking.
Yeah. They're a little short-sighted that way,
Yeah.
especially when they take your gross income. They don't take your net income. So somebody who's making 100,000, you're probably better at this than me, but I don't know what their marginal tax rate is, but it's definitely not 20% at 100,000, and depending on what deductions they have. So that person who's grossing 100 at a T4 level versus somebody who's pulling from their corporation and has other potential personal tax, expenses that they can generate after tax
Yeah,
or before tax, don't have to take home as much and
that's
still
right.
be able to live a comfortable life
Yeah,
and be
there's
able to afford the same things. So, um,
that's not really factored in, right? They have
yeah,
this template and yeah,
that's the thing. They have a template, and if it doesn't fit in that box, they're like,
yeah,
nope,
well,
sorry.
I had to redraft financial statements because the banker's template could not handle the presentation I had. It was one of these deals where one year the borrower owed money to his corporation, so shareholder loan
Hmm.
receivable. The other year, it was the reverse. It was a
Right,
shareholder loan payable. To put them on the same line, one of them had to have brackets around it to make it negative
right,
because they were not the same in each year. So either a negative asset in one year, which is therefore liability,
hmm,
or a negative liability in one year, which is therefore an asset. I said,
that's it.
I don't like that presentation. I'm going to put the asset in the asset column. I'm going to put the liability in the liability column, and I'll just put a zero as the
Right.
comparative. And that blew up the banker's template. And so I had to waste time to redraft the statements to put it all in the same line.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say other than, yeah, this is how rigid they are. So unfortunately, it leads back to what I may have said before, which is the golden rule, right? He who has the gold rules.
Yeah.
Because banks are the lowest cost money almost always,
Yes.
you're kind of, and if it's a long-term investment, you're kind of stuck because, for instance, in multifamily, if you don't get bank investment within the first year or two, like perhaps it was a real fixer upper and you could not get a bank to finance it, but you went in with private money, fixed it all up, and then refinanced out after a year or two, you can't make a multifamily work without some level of institutional financing. It's just too expensive. For fix and flips, because it's short term, it doesn't really matter. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course, you'd rather pay less, but if the difference is, well, I have to wait 3 months to save a few $1,000s, or the private lender will have the money in my account in a week, but I'll just pay extra. Well, I'd rather get on with it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, those 3 months you could have already fixed it and ready to
yeah,
flip it, right?
that's
So
right. Yeah, exactly.
sometimes people get caught up in that. Sometimes it's not even a big interest rate change. And when you're looking at the time to borrow and how much time you're wasting, you could have already moved on to your next project by then. And it's a part of the cost of doing business, especially, well, so in a market where things are always going up, I mean, it's a little easier to tolerate. When in a market that's a little unsteady, maybe you're kind of, second guessing or questioning. So
Yeah,
I can understand, but you have to kind of buffer in some of that cost, like the financing cost, as opposed to and making sure that the project makes sense first and foremost. Sometimes that's something that they ignore.
yeah. And I tell people, if you can do the project in 3 months, count on it taking six. Because you just never know. As I said, I'm a CFO for a home builder, and we kept delaying our start of their build last year because the prices of lumber literally went up 400%. And we said, uh, and for those of you who don't know,
Yeah.
when you sell a home, your sales price is locked in. So if your materials prices go up, if there's a strike, if there's forest fire in BC and all of a sudden lumber prices go through the roof, you just have to eat that. It comes out of the builder's end of things. So we said, okay, well, what's going to happen to lumber prices if we wait? We think it's going to go down. When? We're not exactly sure. So we delayed and delayed and delayed, even to the point of paying compensation for the delay to the home buyers, because that's capped at a certain amount. Whereas the lumber prices, if they kept going up, that's not capped at all. And yeah, that can make it tricky to deliver your project both on time and on budget, because your input costs are literally out of your control, even if you have quotes, because in contracts, they all have these escape clauses for the supplier. And
Yep.
you're
That's
kind of
true.
stuck, unfortunately, as the home builder. So,
Yep. And that wood example was a real life example for sure.
well, yeah, yeah, for everybody. And
Yep.
it was multiple factors, right? The people in the sawmills were getting COVID and having to stay home.
Hmm.
And people who were healthy were staying home because their employer said, you're going to work from home from now on till whenever. And they said, well, now that I'm at home, I kind of have more time because I don't have to commute. I should finally do that deck I've been promising the wife for the last 5 years, right? So they got to go out, and now there's an increased demand. At the same time, there's a decreased supply. And if you've taken your basic econ 101, you know what happens. Prices go through the roof.
Yes, it did.
Yeah. So, and we're now being threatened with another dramatic increase. I'm not sure what the issue is now, but if it's all coming from Canada, I don't think supply chain should be much of an issue, right? Put it on a train, a freight train, and get it over here. But yeah, it's an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so uh, I think that's about it for tonight, unless there's any other questions in the chat or someone else wants to unmute.
great conversation, Michael.
All right, well, nice to chat with you as well, Maria, and hopefully you can make the next one. Hopefully I can make the next one. I'm not too busy, but obviously I'll let you know if there's a change in the date, but for now it's scheduled for the last Thursday. the
Sure, sounds
28th.
good.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining, and I will next week be sending out the link to the recording. I see that we did record it, so that will be now possible. And if you have any suggestions as to what I should cover, please email me or contact me through the meetup group.
Michael, do you have sorry, do you have it on like a YouTube channel or the
I
previous
do.
recordings?
Yes.
Would you
Well,
be able to send me the link to the YouTube channel, or is that
yes, the
somewhere
way it
where
works is I send you a link for this specific recording, but it takes you into my channel where
Okay.
you'll be able to see all the other recordings. So,
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
all right. Well, thanks again for joining us, everybody, and hope to see you here next month.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.